Johnny Carson spent more than 3 decades at the center of American pop culture. From behind his Tonight Show desk, he watched generations of movie stars rise, fall, reinvent themselves, and occasionally combust in the glare of public fascination. Carson almost never played the role of judge. His weapon of choice was the raised eyebrow, the perfectly timed pause, and the one-liner that said just enough without crossing the line. Yet longtime viewers noticed something else. When certain actresses appeared on his stage, the conversation subtly shifted. Carson leaned into Hollywood mythology, flirted with tabloid reputations, and gently teased the romantic whirlwind that often followed the most glamorous women of the era. He never outright labeled anyone, but he understood exactly what the audience already believed. Among the many stars who passed through his studio, 3 women in particular became lightning rods for speculation, fascination, and playful innuendo whenever Carson interviewed them. The first was Elizabeth Taylor. By the time she sat across from Carson, Taylor wasn't just a movie star. She was a legend whose love life had become nearly as famous as her violet eyes. 8 marriages, 2 husbands twice, public affairs splashed across front pages, and romances that unfolded while cameras clicked relentlessly. Taylor lived her personal life in a way few celebrities ever had before. Carson treated her with unmistakable respect, but he never ignored the elephant in the room. When she appeared on the show, the audience already buzzed before she spoke. Carson would often open with mock-formal introductions, emphasizing her royalty-level status in Hollywood, then gently steer the conversation toward relationships without being crude. He once joked that tabloids seemed to treat her romantic life like a serialized novel. Every year brought a new chapter, sometimes a sequel, sometimes a plot twist nobody predicted. Taylor, sharp and self-aware, usually fired back with ease, reminding Carson and the audience that she simply refused to apologize for living passionately. What made those interviews crackle wasn't scandal. It was Taylor's unapologetic confidence. Carson appeared fascinated by how little she cared about public judgment. In an era when actresses were expected to preserve a pristine facade, Taylor shrugged and kept moving, and Carson clearly admired the audacity. He framed her not as reckless, but as unstoppable, someone who followed emotion wherever it led, no matter how loudly the culture whispered behind her back. The second woman who regularly triggered Carson's playful eyebrow raises was Raquel Welch. Welch entered Hollywood with a presence that felt almost engineered to break thermometers. Studios marketed her as the ultimate fantasy figure of the late 1960s and 70s, and audiences responded instantly. But Carson's interviews with her frequently nudged beyond poster girl mythology into the rumors swirling behind the scenes. Welch was linked to multiple high-profile romances over the years. Actors, producers, businessmen, and tabloids often portrayed her as perpetually in motion, moving from one glamorous chapter to the next. Carson didn't frame her as scandalous. Instead, he leaned into the mystique. He'd tease her about how often magazines seemed to invent new suitors for her, asking whether she even had time to sleep between movie shoots and social events. Welch would laugh it off, sometimes rolling her eyes at the exaggerations, other times letting the legend breathe without confirming or denying much at all. Carson clearly enjoyed that dance. His humor implied what the audience already assumed, that Welch lived in a romantic whirlwind, but he let her steer how much truth made it to air. Their exchanges highlighted how fame itself created a kind of mythology around attractive women, where every dinner date became headline material and every friendship sparked speculation. More than anything, Carson seemed intrigued by how Welch balanced that image with fierce independence. She repeatedly emphasized her career, discipline, and control over how she was presented, subtly pushing back against the idea that she was merely drifting from one romance to another. Still, the reputation followed her, and Carson knew exactly how to poke at it without turning cruel, allowing viewers to feel in on the joke while keeping the conversation light. The third woman whose appearances often came wrapped in romantic intrigue was Angie Dickinson. Unlike Taylor's explosive tabloid life or Welsh pin-up mythology, Dickinson's reputation was quieter but persistent. She was linked romantically to several powerful men in Hollywood and politics, including Frank Sinatra, and her sophistication made her one of the most alluring figures of the 1960s and 70s. When Dickinson joined Carson, the tone shifted into something more intimate and conspiratorial. Carson would soften his voice, lean forward slightly, and asked questions that hinted at her legendary status in elite social circles without naming names. The audience laughed not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He teased her about always seeming to be at the center of glamorous rooms, about knowing everyone worth knowing, about living a life that sounded suspiciously like a movie script. Dickinson typically responded with graceful evasiveness, smiling without giving much away, allowing mystery to remain part of her appeal. Carson appeared genuinely charmed by her ability to deflect. Unlike some guests who shut down personal questions, Dickinson redirected them with wit, never defensive, never revealing more than she intended. That control fascinated Carson. It was the mark of someone who understood Hollywood's hunger for stories and chose carefully which ones to feed it. Among the women whose visits consistently carried that electric undercurrent was Sharon Stone. Stone rose to international fame with a mix of elegance and unapologetic sexuality that fascinated the media. After Basic Instinct exploded into pop culture consciousness, she became one of the most scrutinized women in the industry. Every relationship she entered, whether with actors, athletes, or businessmen, was treated like breaking news. When she appeared with Carson, the conversation never drifted into gossip outright, but he frequently alluded to how suddenly the entire world seemed obsessed with her personal life. He joked about how fast fame arrives and how even grocery shopping becomes impossible when everyone wants to know who you're dating. Stone often responded with sharp intelligence, reminding him that attention came with the territory but didn't define her. Carson seemed genuinely impressed by how she handled that glare. He framed her not as reckless, but as someone navigating a storm she hadn't entirely chosen. Still, the implication lingered. Hollywood had turned her into a symbol of seductive freedom, and the rumor mill never slowed down once it did. Another guest whose appearances crackled with subtext was Jane Fonda. Fonda was unlike almost anyone else who sat in Carson's chair. She was a Hollywood royal, an activist, a fitness mogul, and a woman whose romantic life intersected with politics, protest movements, and powerful men. Her marriages to Roger Vadim and Tom Hayden alone placed her at the crossroads of cinema and revolution. Carson approached Fonda with playful caution. He teased her about living multiple lives at once, movie star one year, political lightning rod the next, while letting viewers read between the lines about the intensity of her personal world. Fonda didn't shy away from complexity. She spoke openly about transformation, about relationships that shaped her, and about refusing to fit into neat categories. Then there was Goldie Hawn. At first glance, Hawn seemed to exist in a completely different category. She was bubbly, funny, approachable, the eternal optimist. But her romantic life had long intrigued fans. Divorced young, linked to several famous men, and eventually forming one of Hollywood's most famous long-term partnerships with Kurt Russell, she embodied a different version of romantic notoriety, not scandalous, but constantly discussed. When Hawn appeared on Carson's stage, he leaned into her charm, often joking about how she made falling in love look effortless. He teased her about being part of Hollywood's most admired couples, about whether romance came as naturally to her as comedy did.